achieved.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we're breaking down the upcoming UFC Fight Night Gustafsson vs. Manuwa event, which will take place live from the O2 Arena in London, England on March 8th. 4 main card fights, which I'll be breaking down for you on the show. All of my preliminary predictions will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. I took a little hiatus. I did not predict the Ultimate Fighter China finale. I gave you a couple fights. I ended up breaking down 5, and I went 3-2 overall on the card. But if you notice, 4-1 underdog opening the night pulled off an upset, continuing my theory of the underdogs pulling off wins in the early stages of the event. Either way, I've done fairly well of late, and my bet packs have been awesome. The last 2 bet packs I've done have produced a combined $4,200, just a little bit over that actually, in winnings, which is very impressive. And again, I hope to continue my success here. They're only $10 at kamikazeoverdrive.net. You can head over there, purchase a bet pack, employ my information, hopefully turn a profit just like I did the last couple of shows, and we'll continue that success together. I hope you enjoy. I always put a lot of work into my posters. I don't go and copy these from other websites where I make them myself, but I do like to try and borrow styles, and on Cage Warriors, which is a UK promotion, I really like the way they put their posters together with some focus on the nationalities of the fighters and the style they do it. So for this and the sliders on my website, I've tried to emulate that style a little bit, and I really hope you like them. And either way, I always like the comments I hear, both about my predictions and about my artwork that I put together. Either way, 4 main card fights, very interesting looking card. Let's get to the first prediction of the night. Our opening fight of the night takes place in the UFC's welterweight division. His highly touted submission fighter, Gunnar Nelson, 11-0-1, takes on Sambo practitioner Omari Akhemdov, 12-0. Both guys undefeated, so one of their O's has to go. Now, Nelson's 2-0 in the UFC, but both wins came over fighters who have since been cut, George Santiago and DeMarcus Johnson, and he's been out of action for almost 13 months, and he's been a fairly inactive fighter for most of his career, despite only being 24 years of age. Now, Akhemdov was victorious in a very wild debut over Thiago Perpetu. He has 10 first-round wins, which is pretty remarkable, and he's never been out of the first round since 2011, so he has limited experience in longer fights. Now, Akhemdov debuted at 185 pounds. He's cutting to 170, which is a little bit of a concern. He'll have a slight size advantage over Nelson, but not much of one. Now, the Russian is a master of Sambo. He's 4-1 fights ended by submission, so very capable on the ground, and he has knockout powers we saw in the last fight. Now, Gunnar, he's a BJJ black belt, 7 wins by submission, including his UFC debut. And he's also a karate black belt as well, so he's very versed on the feet, just like he is on the ground. But overall, he's a very highly accomplished grappler outside of MMA, and that's why he's so respected and touted as a prospect and a potential champion in the making. So far in his career in the UFC, he's averaged 2.42 takedowns at 60%. He only needs 1 takedown in a lot of situations to control and keep an opponent on the mat. So even though those numbers aren't mind-boggling, they certainly, he is very effective on the ground. Now, Akhemdov, he's willing to work off his back, which is, a good thing. He has 3 guillotine chokes and 1 triangle, which are all submissions you predominantly get from that position, but he has questionable takedown defense, and the big thing is if he can't hit a sub off his back, positionally, he'll be losing the fight against a guy like Nelson. Now, he got hurt early in his debut, got caught with a short hand coming forward, which he's a little bit reckless, but he did land some solid single and double leg takedowns to get back in control with his grappling, and he worked to back control eventually. Now, he was also taken down by the Brazilian in that fight, and he caught him coming forward. Eventually ended the fight when he caught Perpetu coming forward with a knockout and put him away, which was pretty impressive in a wild, crazy fight. Now for Gunnar Nelson, he does an excellent job of varying his striking and his grappling. He strikes and then changes levels for a takedown. He really keeps his opponent second-guessing what's about to happen. He can score takedowns with quick level changes in the clinch too, which is a very tough thing to defend against. He's an aggressive guard passer, and he can control the mat and really shut guys down. And again, like I said, the way he passes the guard and keeps active on top, it can really break opponents down and take a lot out of their stamina and conditioning and wear them down for the rest of the fight. And he has pretty decent ground and pound when he gets it off as well. On the feet, he's got a karate base, throws that sideways stance, lots of kicks, good footwork overall. He's very quick, and he's a little undersized for the division, so his quickness definitely shows up. He should have a speed advantage in this fight as well. He tends to hold his hands a little bit low, which is a little bit of a concern for me, but he needs to be careful against Omari's ability to come forward, bull rush, and throw heavy strikes, but so far he's had success. He was taking a few shots against George Santiago, but he has a decent chin, and he never gets unnerved by the taking shots. He seems to hold himself together fairly well, and he's a very calm and collected style of fighting. Again, but that'll be contrast with the aggressive wild attack of Akhemdov. We'll see which one. I would say Nelson's is the better one as long as he can avoid getting caught up in a bull rush. Again, The calm approach also should help his cardio, allow him to set the pace, and he tends to slow a little bit, but still he's still being effective, and it doesn't take that much out of his attack. Once Nelson establishes the takedown in this fight, I think it'll slow Akhemdov's push forward on the feet and really take a lot out of his striking capabilities. Technically, Gunnar Nelson simply is too talented for his opponent, but he can't underestimate him. He could get clipped with a shot or just get outworked and out-hustled like Machida has a tendency to do if he tries to counter and be too technical. Nelson should be able to control and eventually get the sub on the ground, which especially if his opponent starts to slow down beyond the first round. So my prediction is Gunnar Nelson to defeat Omari Akhemdov by submission. The second fight of the night's in the UFC's flyweight division, and it lost a little bit of its luster when an injury replacement forced one of the fighters to pull out. But nonetheless, we have 24-8-0 Brad One Punch Pickett making his 125-pound debut, taking on Cage Warrior champion Neil Two-Tap Seery, who comes in with a record of 13-9. Now, this is a matchup of England versus Ireland, and the crowd should be hot, and they should be hot in favor of Brad Pickett. So it's going to be a very emotional fight for Pickett. And one of the last times he was here, when he fought Renan Barão, he got too emotional, and that ended up costing him. We'll see if he corrects that here. Now, as I said, this is Pickett's flyweight debut. He's coming off a 6-month layoff to prep for this fight for the cut, versus Seery, he's making his UFC debut, and it came as a late notice replacement. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. There are definitely some contrasts. Now, again, this was supposed to be Ian McCall versus Brad Pickett, and again, this is only 3 weeks notice for Seery, who stepped up to take this fight and take his opportunity to be in the UFC. He's an older fighter. He's been around for a little while, but so he jumped on the opportunity. Now, he's the former Cage Warrior flyweight champion. Was supposed to be facing former UFC fighter Ulysses Gomez in December, but Gomez had to pull out because of health issues, and the bout was scrapped as a result. Now, Seery comes in with 6 wins by knockout, 5 by submission, and 2 decision. On the flip side of the coin, 1 KO loss, 5 submission losses, and 2 decision losses. He had some trouble early in his career, hence his record's not nearly as impressive as a lot of other guys, but he's certainly been doing much better of late. Now, Pickett, 7 wins by knockout, 10 submission wins, and 6 decisions. He's been knocked out once. He's also suffered 4 submission losses and 3 decisions. Now, for Seery, he's a very crisp striker, throws a nice 1-2 combo and will finish with a kick. He has a hard uppercut he likes to sneak in, and for the most part, he will stand and trade, but he can also be a measured striker and look for openings and counter. His last loss, he got caught in a very quick rolling knee bar early in the fight, and he can be taken down. As I said, he's been submitted 5 times in his career, so there are some issues there. Now, when you look at Brad Pickett in his last fight, he really struggled with the speed, especially the hand speed of Mayday McDonald, and also Eddie Wineland for the most part in that fight too. And that's something to keep in mind here. When you go down a division, you're going to be facing guys who are going to be faster. For that, he needs to deal with the speed of the flyweights, and I think he'll have to adjust and see use his physicality more than he could at bantamweight. Pickett is a technical brawler. He likes to stand and trade, but that cost him, again, as I mentioned, against Renan Barão. But then at the same time, it helped him against Yves Jaboué. It allowed him to get in and eventually land that knockout blow. He mixes his combinations with head movement and footwork to help him get inside and cover up, to deal with the reach. But moving on a flyweight, he's fighting guys his same size or even smaller, in this case, relatively the same size, and that's going to help him be more effective in the striking exchanges. I think his power will translate very well to 125 pounds and make him just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than he was as a bantamweight. Look for Pickett to mix up his wrestling as well. He averages 2.99 takedowns at 58%. He's a far more effective fighter when he has a varied attack and uses a variety of techniques when he's fighting. He's 4-1 when he wins the takedown battle in his Zuffa career, but 2-3 when he ties or loses. So it shows him how important it is for him to out-wrestle his opponent. He landed 10 versus Demetrius Johnson, who happens to be the flyweight champion, 3 versus Ivan Menjivar, and 4 versus Mike Easton, who has excellent takedown defense, a very strong grappler in his own right. Pickett knows he's fighting for relevancy in a new division. We just saw Scott Jorgensen drop down and lose a very important fight that's kind of set him back. Pickett's a little bit older than Jorgensen as far as I can remember, and he knows he needs a win here to get back on track and get himself in the conversation. He can't afford to overlook Seery, but the short notice and level of competition faced for Seery, I think it's going to be too much as far as stepping up here. Pickett is at his best when he varies his attack between wrestling and striking. I anticipate him doing that here. He knows with having beaten Demetrius Johnson, he could be fast-tracked to a title shot with a couple impressive performances. I think he starts off strong here, especially at home. So my prediction is Brad Pickett to defeat Neil Seery by submission. In the co-main event of the evening, number 13's ranked lightweight Michael the Menace Johnson, 15-8-0, battles unranked Melvin the Young Assassin Guillard, 48-13-3 with 2 no contests. Now, this fight was originally scheduled as a rematch between Guillard and Pearson after Guillard hit Pearson with illegal shots. It was ruled a no contest in a fight that Guillard was clearly winning. Nonetheless, Johnson steps up to take it, and Johnson's been on a roll of late. And this is a battle of former teammates as they both train at Black Zillions, so it'll be interesting to see if they learn something that they can use to their advantage in this fight. Physically, Michael Johnson, 2 inches taller and have a 2.5-inch reach advantage, but Guillard's not a massive man, so this shouldn't come as a surprise that he will be the smaller fighter, and he should be used to this by now. Johnson has been establishing solid knockout power in recent fights, which is something to take into consideration division. 7 KOs overall, coming off a knockout over Gleison Tibau. He also stopped Danny Castillo a couple fights back. Now, Guillard, he's well known for his knockout power, potentially one of the hardest hitters in the division. 20 of his 31 wins have come by KO, stopping last 3 Mac Danzig, Shane Roller, and Evan Dunham. He has 8 knockouts overall in the UFC, which is very impressive considering how long he's been there and how hard guys are to put away in this promotion, especially recently with all the decision wins. Statistically, strikes landed per minute favors Johnson at 3.53 to 3.24, so fairly minimal advantage, but still a slight advantage. On the flip side of things, Melvin Guillard has a pretty significant advantage in strikes absorbed per minute, taking 1.1 less strikes per minute than Johnson does. He's significantly harder to hit, and that could show up in a fight, especially if this one goes long or even short, and it's just as far as the power quotient is concerned. But keep in mind, again, Johnson's made some significant strides of late, and he's outlanded his last 2 opponents by a combined 138 strikes to 37, so that's pretty impressive as well. Now, Melvin, he likes to stay on the outside, come forward aggressively, in and out, good bounce to his attack, uses speed and really puts some hurt on guys, and trying to limit what he takes in exchange. For Johnson, he likes to stay more in the pocket, keep coming forward, use those fast hands, fast feet, and he has some decent head movement as well. One thing to keep in mind, Melvin Guillard's chin could be a bit of an issue. He's been knocked out just once, which was by Donald Cerrone, but we saw Joe Lozon hurt him prior to submitting him, and Guillard's been in a lot of stand-up battles. He's got a massive record, and some of that ring wear and tear could be catching up with him. Johnson, no KO losses, but he did get dropped by Danny Castillo prior to eventually returning the favor and finishing him, and that was very close. That's almost as close as you can be to getting knocked out without actually losing the fight right there. Now, Guillard also will slow down as fights progress, especially in high-paced fights, and that's something to keep in mind if this fight goes long. Both men have had issues on the ground with submission defense, and that's something to see if either one of them look to exploit the opposite struggles. Johnson's a former collegiate wrestler, but 6 of his 8 losses have come by submission, including 2 in the UFC. Plus, he has 2 decision losses versus Miles Jury and Jonathan Brookins that were based on wrestling, especially the Jury fight where Johnson got put on his back and pretty much had nothing to offer. Guillard, 9 of his 12 losses have come by submission. 6-2 in fights where he doesn't give up a takedown. So keep in mind, if he goes to the mat, he's in trouble. But when he wins the takedown, or when he shuts his opponent's takedown game down, he is very strong. As I said, 6-2. On the other side of things, when he gives up at least 1 takedown, he's 5-7 overall. Guillard's 65% takedown defense, which is pretty impressive, versus Michael Johnson, 0.56 takedowns per fight, so not a big takedown fighter. He's only landed 4 total takedowns in his 9 fights in the UFC. He did land 2 versus Joe Lozon, but it's not an essential part of his game. We'll see if that changes for this fight. For Melvin Guillard, he's lost just 1 fight that was primarily contested on the feet. Again, that was the Donald Cerrone quick KO that he nearly KO'd Cerrone at the start of that bout anyway. 8 UFC opponents who have beaten Melvin Guillard have a combined 118 submission wins. All of them are in double digits. For the most part, Melvin Guillard, and that's not Michael Johnson's game. He only has a pair of submission victories. For the most part, Melvin Guillard is a different fighter when he's forced to respect, defend, and focus on submission-capable opponents. Guillard is also, on the other side of things, more likely to use his wrestling, and that's a big part of it. I think he could look to take down Johnson and put him on his back and wear him out there. Speed has been the key for Johnson's success as well on the feet, but that he won't have nearly as big an advantage or an advantage at all against a guy like Melvin Guillard. Johnson has a lot of momentum coming into this bout, and Melvin Guillard mentally is a massive question mark if he shows up focused. Either way, I like what I saw to Melvin Guillard against Danzig, and I like what I saw him against Pearson. And keep in mind, Johnson's not that far removed from a couple lackluster performances against Reza Madadi and Miles Jury, and my prediction is Melvin Guillard to defeat Michael Johnson. I'll take Melvin Guillard by knockout. In our main event of the evening, 2 of the top-ranked European fighters will go at it in the UFC's light heavyweight division. As number 1 ranked and former title challenger Alexander the Mauler Gustafsson, 15-2-0, battles undefeated number 11th ranked Jimi, the poster boy Manuwa, 14-0. Now this is a very dangerous fight for Gustafsson. He's entering enemy territory, fighting Manuwa on his home turf. He's the top-ranked light heavyweight in the division versus the number 11 ranked guy, who's still a highly ranked guy, but nonetheless, it's a big disparity in rankings. And if he loses this fight, he tumbles down significantly from a position that many feel will lead him to a quick title shot turnaround against Jones in the not-too-distant future. Gustafsson overall 7-2 in the UFC with a submission loss to Phil Davis back in 2010, I believe. And that controversial loss to John Jones, which I just rewatched, and I certainly can see how Jones could have been awarded that fight. Nonetheless, it was tight. Manuwa overall 3-0 with 2 injury TKOs versus Cyrille Diabate and Ryan Jimmo, plus a doctor stoppage against Kyle Kingsbury. And all 3 of those fights, though, he was winning them. Huge opportunity for Manuwa, no question about it. A win puts him in the conversation for a title shot very soon, especially at his age. This is his massive opportunity. I expect him to recognize that and try and take full advantage. Will Gustafsson look to stand and bang with Manuwa and prove his mettle? And that's a big question. He did very well against Jon Jones on the feet, and that's something that concerns me a little bit because he did so well against Jon Jones. Jones overall is the more complete fighter than Jimi Manuwa, but I think Manuwa is a far more dangerous striker with his technique and with his power than the UFC light heavyweight champion. The movement and speed gave Gus a lot of advantage over Jon Jones, and we saw that show up especially early before he started taking damage. He landed some solid right hands with regularity, and that was very impressive. For me, Manuwa's a little bit more flat-footed, but he could look to counter, and he has such good technique and confidence in his striking, I don't think he's going to mind sitting back and trying to pot-shot Gustafsson as he comes in. Whether that works or not, that's still debatable. Physically, a 4-inch height advantage for Gustafsson, but a 3-inch reach advantage from Jimi. But the thing, again, we talked about Gus's reach advantage. Is it being recorded wrong? Nonetheless, there's some disparity in the physicality, one in favor of each man. Excellent takedown D for Gustafsson. We saw that against Jones, but that won't be an issue against Manuwa, I don't think. I don't expect to see him shooting. He did take Diabate down a couple of times, but Gustafsson's a whole other animal. On the flip side, Gus, we saw him take Jones down a couple of times. He's working out of Alliance MMA, training with Phil Davis, or at least he was, and he's shown significant improvements in his grappling game, both offensively and defensively. Manuwa, when he fought Cyrille Diabate, he was a very tall man in his own right. He was getting tagged with a few shots, especially in close, but he's very dangerous from that position. We saw him pin Ryan Jimmo along the cage, and he used that position to land some brutal knee strikes that eventually probably resulted in the end of that fight with Jimmo suffering a leg injury. He drove him into the body, but more specifically, he put him into the thigh, and that was impressive. He hurt Jimmo with those shots, and you could see him physically grimace, and Jimmo's a big, strong man, and he took some damage. He really slowed down some of his movement. He turns that knee over very well. I think that's a technique he should use against Gustafsson if he can close the distance and control him, which is a big question mark, but he could take a lot of Gus's movement away. Manuwa likes to throw a really solid leaping left hook. He has some solid leg kicks as well. He's very brutal, as I just mentioned, in the clinch, and he threw a hook kick against Jimmo, so he has a lot of different striking techniques in his arsenal that he can call upon. How will the threat of the takedown impact Manuwa's striking performance? I think it could show up big, especially if Gus establishes it early. Jimmo and Diabate, for the most part, stood in front of Manuwa. I think Gus is going to use a lot more movement and a lot more angles, and that's going to give Jimi a lot more trouble as far as landing with consistency. Manuwa, another thing, minimal experience beyond the first round. 3 fights have gone to the second, and this is a 5-round fight if Gustafsson looks to drag it deep. And that could be something he's focused on. Cardio was an issue against Kyle Kingsbury, but that was a debut fight. But nonetheless, you saw him getting taken down, put on his back a couple times, even by a very tired fighter, and that's a concern, especially against a guy like Gustafsson, who just coming off a 5-round fight was tired and hurt at the end, but put up a very good performance against the best light heavyweight on the planet. Now, Manuwa needs to fight this fight at his pace. Both guys land well over 4 strikes landed per minute, but Gus has done it more consistently over a longer period of fights. Well, Manuwa, I think his total was inflated by the barrage he was able to put on Kyle Kingsbury in his debut. But what we have here is Manuwa's power versus Gustafsson's speed and pace. Both guys are technically sound. I like speed and pace over power as far as I'm concerned. Arguably, this is the most dangerous striker Gus has ever faced, but look for Gustafsson to have grown since his loss to Jon Jones and come out stronger. Gus will have drilled wrestling in preparation for this fight. I have no doubt about that. I expect him to look to try and take it to the ground at some point and really shake things up. He's a BJJ purple belt. He has 2 submission wins in the UFC. I think he'll either do it early and take control of the fight, or he will maybe take advantage of a tired Jimi Manuwa late in this fight. And my prediction is Alexander Gustafsson to defeat Jimi Manuwa by submission. So those are my 4 main card predictions for the upcoming event. All 4 finishes, 3 submissions and a stoppage, which is something we haven't seen a lot of in the UFC of late, and of course that corresponds, interestingly enough, maybe coincidentally, with the changing of the bonus structure from knockout and submission night to performances of the night. Either way, I think we're going to see a lot of stoppages. And then again, we had Dong Hyun Kim with that reverse spinning elbow, which was absolutely lovely, and the way he knocked out John Hathaway, very impressive. I had winning by a decision and did not expect to see that coming. The Eric Silva knockout was not a fluke, but a product of an environment that Hathaway and Kim would not find themselves in. Nonetheless, very impressive in Dong Hyun Kim, and he's in the conversation now as far as a top contender and could be a couple wins away from a potential title shot in a very open division. Nonetheless, that was the last event. Another thing I'd like to harp on before I move on is just the performance bonuses. I really do not like the way they changed it up. I've always been a proponent of wanting to see fight of the night, knockout of the night, submission of the night, and performance of the night. And what Dana could easily do is when you don't have a submission or a knockout or you don't have both, then you give out 3 performance of the night bonuses. But I think you should have all of those. It encourages guys to go out and finish and not just fight safe and try and put on a good performance but nothing spectacular. I think they should restructure it. But again, you know how Dana is. Doing anything different or against what he's already done would be an admittance of some wrongdoing, and he will certainly not do that. Additionally, with Fight Pass, this event will be only on Fight Pass as far as I know. I don't know if it'll be shown in North America, at least Canada, on Sportsnet. Nonetheless, I'm not a huge fan of Fight Pass. I think it's a step in the wrong direction. I feel this is the UFC taking away events from mainstream fighters. When I first heard about it, I thought, oh, fantastic. What they're doing is they're giving people who maybe don't have access to these fights a chance to purchase and watch these fights for $9.99 and catch up on that, plus all the access to the rest of their library. Now we have cards like we saw the China one that were specifically on Fight Pass, and if you don't have it, no one gets to see it. Well, I think that's a step in the wrong direction as far as exposure for many fighters are concerned. Nonetheless, I thought I'd air my viewpoints on those. Please tell me what you guys think. I'm curious to see if you've purchased Fight Pass, which I obviously, being a massive fan, have. Please post and let me know if you've purchased Fight Pass or if you had it and recently canceled it now that it's costing you as opposed to the free subscription. I'd like to see you guys comment in my in the YouTube part of my video, the comment section. Nonetheless, thank you as always for listening. UFC 171 is on the horizon with a massive welterweight fight. Going to be an excellent card. This should be a good card as well. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions.